Our guest today is someone you've seen in different spaces, but I don't think you've heard her the way she has spoken today. She's a dancer and someone who's grown around strong ideas. She carries tradition and individuality naturally. And I'm really looking forward to understanding the person behind the name. Welcome, Miss Radhe Jaggi, and let's get the show started. When everything external is removed, roles, identity, expectation, what remains constant for you?
I think even when the roles and expectations are there, I'm still just Radhe. People ask me, oh, you're Radhe, you're a Bharatanatyam dancer, you're Sadhguru's daughter, you're somebody's wife, you're like this, you're working in the school. My identity is not dependent on any of those things.
The video I saw of you on YouTube, you were doing a tutorial of how you put your potte. Wow!
Very common. Like a lot of dancers wear kumkum potte. It's not rare. So I used to wear a long one because that's easy to draw.
Yeah.
My friends were like, hey, try one round bindi, round bindi. So she would put Vaseline and put kumkum for me for a few days when I was in college. Then I really liked the way it looked, so I started doing it every day. Many people had messaged me and asked me, how do you wear your bindi? How do you wear the bindi? How does it come like a circle? Then I told my friend, I said, hey, I can't be explaining to everybody how to put. We'll just make a video and post it.
Do you know how many millions of views that video has?
I am too scared to check.
You lost your mom when you were 7.
Almost 7, yeah.
What do you think you miss the most? Is it the person or the absence of what could have been?
I don't actively miss her like that. I remember going back to school and my teacher asking me, oh, you must miss your mother so much. And I said, no, not really. It was very clear that she was no more. I have to say that my father took on every role in my life. He was my father, he was my mother, he was everything.
From your experience, how important do you think parents should help children navigate instead of saying, listen, this is what you have to do?
Your interests and my interests are so different. Or let's say between a husband and wife, it's so different. Obviously, between you and your child also, it's so different. I think navigating that is very important as opposed to just saying do this or do that. It changes from family to family, but I think if you expose your children to all walks of life and all kinds of things, then I think people will get into it.
Welcome to The Rayan Show. I'm your host, Rayan Mithun, and this season is brought to you by Satyabama University and powered by Naturals. So welcome. Thank you for taking time off and
Thank you
being
for
here
having
today.
me.
Every time I see a picture of you, I see you dancing, I feel the sense of serene.
Thank you.
Like, I still haven't figured out what it is about you. Like, I was telling my friend, I was interviewing you today, and she's like, she's the most beautiful woman in the world. There's something about her. I was like, yeah, but I'm not able to pinpoint what it is. Hopefully, by the end of this, I'm going to be able to do that.
If you are able to, please tell me also.
So, I want to
Thank
go
you.
into a little bit of your childhood. I know you've spoken a lot about it, about how you grew up climbing trees, travel the world. So if I ask you about your childhood, what is the feeling that comes from it?
My childhood was exhilarating, I think. It was full of love. And this is definitely an advantage of being Sadhguru's daughter, is that everybody who has so much love and grace and, you know, all that affection for him, it kind of spills over into affection for me. So growing up, I had so many people who were willing to be my mother and father and sibling and this and that. And everywhere we traveled, people took such good care of us. And it didn't matter what kind of home, it was how they did it. So like when we used to go to Tirupur, Salem, Erode, all those places, and we used to go very regularly. We used to stay with like 3-4 different people. You know, they'll give that one room to my father and he will sleep inside. Then the father in the family and the mother in the family will sleep. Their children and me will all be in a row in a pie, on the floor. And that's literally how I grew up in all these people's homes. If I was not in school, I was in these people's homes. So many people, different people, sometimes sleeping in the living room with the rest of the family, sometimes in the children's bedroom with their children. So morning wake up means everybody wakes up. Morning shower means everybody gets a shower. Somebody's getting new clothes for Deepavali means Radhe gets a set of new clothes for Deepavali. Like there was no distinction between their children and me. So, I mean, my life was full of this. And even as I grew up, I had people like Ma Gambhiri is a brahmachari there. In many ways, she was my mother. as much as many other people were, but she was very crucial also.
Okay.
And I remember when I was about 12, 13, I used to become very sarcastic. So then she sat me down and she said, "You've become so sarcastic." I said, "So what? It's just a..." And it's
Like-
also something that we all pick up at
Yeah.
that age. And then she very beautifully explained to me, when you say this is how people understand it and all of that. I never felt like I was attacked, like somebody's criticizing me. I just felt, oh, this is a perspective that I've not thought about. And then I changed the way that I spoke, or not that I changed, that I was more conscious of when I was sarcastic.
Mhm.
So different people giving me inputs about how I do or say or something, and always full of love. So I really got the best from everybody. I didn't, I was not so colored by one person or
Mhm.
so colored by another person. I just got the best from everybody. Everywhere I go, people pick me up and put me on top of the car, and here and there, and everybody in different kinds of businesses come to my office, come to my shop, sit there and watch how they do their daily life, I mean, it was really wonderful. I can't say. Except for, that one age when you get a little moody. I had
Yeah.
about a year when I was like, oh. But
I don't
other
wanna do
than
this.
that, I want to do this. But other than that, it was really, it was too wonderful. It was too beautiful.
I remember your dad saying this, that he was not there quite a bit. I mean, he traveled, but then I was like, oh, maybe she felt lonely. But from what you're saying, I don't think you felt lonely.
No, not at all.
There were so many people to look after you and give you that love, no?
Absolutely. And I think also, my father says this a lot, that he was like a telephonic dad, which is factually, it's true.
Okay.
Because I was in boarding school for a lot of my life, and he was traveling a lot.
Mhm.
That was his main teaching years, was when I was growing up. Those,
Okay.
like, let's say 25, 30 years, 40
Uh-huh.
years, now about 45 years. But let's say that 25, 30 years is when he was traveling, teaching,
Mhm.
teaching all over the country, and then slowly across the US and also little parts of Europe. And he will always say, oh, I was a telephonic dad, I was not there, and all of that. But it was never my experience that he was not there. In my experience, I don't feel that distance of I didn't get to spend enough time with him. Or, I mean, I complain about it now sometimes, because
that's-
he gets to travel to places and he won't even take me. So for that, I come, like, he went to see the World Cup match, football match, and I was sitting in my house, like, watching it on TV. And somebody sent me a video of him at the World Cup match, and I was like, hello, you could have taken me.
That +1 you could have taken me.
+1. But his +1 is always somebody from the office, because they have work to do.
Ah.
Like, their thing is, when we go there, we meet everybody, and as much of his work as we can make available to everybody. So they are much more useful in that than I am. I will just be an extra seat. So though that way I complain.
Mhm.
But otherwise, I really never felt that he was not there. Because when you're with him, for whatever few minutes or few moments or few days that you're with him, he is with you like 100%.
Mhm.
Even if there are 3 people in the room, each person in the room will feel like he's speaking only to them.
Mhm.
And this is a quality about him that I have not seen in anybody else. So I really never felt that he was distant.
Yeah.
So initially it was letters. I have letters and letters and postcards from all over the world and all over the country. And I have then emails, of course, once we got a little bit older. And then after that, he just told the school, please, I need to be on the phone with her, because otherwise when will he get a chance to sit down and communicate and everything? So he said, please. So I was allowed phone calls once in a while.
Mhm.
But I really never felt like he was not there.
So it was quality over quantity.
100%. And I think the advantage of also being in a boarding school
Mhm.
is that everyday nudge that's there between, like, a parent
Yeah.
and a child, like, that's completely gone.
Yeah.
Did you do this? Did you do your
Mm.
homework? Where are your clothes? What about this? What about that? Because boarding school teaches you to be so independent.
Mhm.
That everyday management of schedule and that nudge, that is not there
Mhm.
at all.
Mhm.
Every other moment you spend with them is like
Like a holiday, no?
really,
Mm.
it was such joy. And he was doing such interesting work, meeting so many incredible people, and I was like a fly on the wall listening to all these conversations and just absorbing. No, I don't feel like he was not there, even if he says he was not there.
I think parents just like to say that, So you grew up very unconventionally. When we don't have like a rigid structure. Like like a parent, we want that structure for our children. Where do you think kids learn responsibility from when they don't have that structure?
Responsibility was never a choice in
Mm.
our house. Even something simple, if I did something stupid, I dropped something, I broke something, he would sit down and ask me what happened, how did it happen. And you know what's worse than getting yelled at is having to explain why you did something stupid. It's much worse.
That too calmly.
So, yeah, very calmly. And you have to explain, I did this, then I made a stupid decision, and then that stupid decision went like you. That's so much worse
Uh-huh.
than if I would really, sometimes I would think, my God, the way like some of my friends' parents would just yell at them if they did something stupid. If he just yelled and went away, no, it would be easy. I could deal with it. But he'll sit down. I have to explain why I've done stupid things. This is really like different.
I
So
understand that.
responsibility was not a choice.
Mhm.
Anything I did, it was because I did it.
Mm.
There was no option of passing it off as it just happened, or this was just the situation I found myself in.
Mhm.
It was very much, I had to think through the process of how I got myself into that situation and where all I made dumb decisions to get myself into that situation. It was me who did it.
Yeah.
It was me who got myself in that situation. It was me who had to get myself out of that situation. That was, it was, I never had the luxury of saying, but he said or she said.
Mm.
They can say what they want to say. What did
Yeah.
you do? Like, what did you do with that information? What did you
Mm.
do in that situation? What choices did you make? How much information did you gather before you decided something? It was always about that. So responsibility was not a choice in the house.
I can imagine, like for me, I'll just shout and I'll leave it. But I'm just thinking, imagine, because one day I just shouted at my daughter and she's like, you're going to shout only, no, it's okay, you shout and finish.
See, I didn't have that choice.
Now I'm like, maybe I've been like tackling it the wrong way. Maybe I should sit down and say, listen, what did you do? Give me the step by step. Yeah, I think I need to start this.
And growing up, I think I did some stupid things, but I also had the thing to own up to them.
Hmm.
If I did something stupid, I would immediately be like, okay, listen, I'll tell you what happened. Now, before somebody tells you some messed up version of
Yeah.
it, let me explain to you, this is how it happened, this is how it happened, this is what I got in trouble
Okay.
for. I want you to know about it before somebody comes and tells you some other version of the story. But I think that helps because I'm very clear that I'm the reason that it happened to me.
Hmm.
I may not be the reason it happened to somebody else, but the reason something happened to me or the reason I found myself in some situation, I'm the reason for it. So I have to see how to
Yeah.
figure it out. That's all.
But that's a fabulous trait, no? Because as humans, we like to like pass it off on to other people, other situations. Like, it happened because of this. But I think when we take, like we say, it's because of us, I think it also gives us a lot of clarity and we won't do it again.
Clarity, it's not even about not doing it again. Every moment you're aware of the fact that I am here and at any moment you can make a decision that will change the direction in which it goes. Like many times you have a foregone conclusion. If you do this, this is where it will end up. And then
Mhm.
when you're halfway through, you just realize that's not where you want to end up and you just think, okay, but now I don't have a choice. That now I don't have a choice doesn't exist for me. Wherever I am, even if it's halfway through, I can rethink and reconsider, rework the plan and understand this is where I want to go, that's where I want to go. Okay, we've gotten till here, but now we need to pivot and go somewhere else. Like I'm always ready to change something at a drop of a hat. I'm not like I have this plan and we just got to go with the plan. I have my destination.
Mhm.
Whatever route, however I have to go to get to my destination, I'm happy to make any change as long as it gets me there.
That's
It
interesting.
doesn't have to be my idea, your idea, his idea. If it gets me there and you have a better way of getting there, I'll hitch a ride with you. Why?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? But you've always said this, no? You never realized that your upbringing was different from other people.
No.
But was there ever a incident or something where you're actually I've been brought up differently?
I think more as an adult. Like more as an adult when I got to meet a lot of people and I realized that they thought about certain things very differently from how I thought about it. Or like this thing of changing a plan. Like if they have something set in their head, to make a decision on the spot, they would just be like, but we've decided. And I'm
Mm.
like, I know we've decided, but it's not working. So
Mm.
it never occurs to me that, oh, this is the plan and somehow I have to only follow through with this. If it works for me, I will follow through. But as an adult, I met a lot more people who were maybe more rigid in the way they were thinking,
Mhm.
or in the direction in which they were thinking, and I couldn't understand why.
Mm.
Then I was like, okay, maybe I was brought up differently, and that's why I think maybe slightly more flexibly.
Mhm.
I still don't know what it's like to be brought up in any other way.
Yeah, because you've
Right?
been, yeah.
So I don't have, so I'm like,
Mm.
this is how I was brought up, this is how I was brought up. Now, as an adult, like recently we were in the beach and in the ocean, and you could just walk into the water, till here. And I realized I've done it so many times with my father that even this time when I went with my friends, I said, come, we'll go, and happily walked into the water, into the waves. And you can kind of see and gauge, okay, there's little extra current, it's going that way,
Mm.
so you stick to this side of the beach and everything. And I thought all this was very obvious to everybody.
Yeah, it isn't.
So then you kind of realize, okay, these people are comfortable, these people are less comfortable,
Mm.
these people are scared. Like, you kind of gauge from where you are. And whatever it is, my father has done more. So for me, I'm also thinking, oh, but if he was here, he would be swimming till there. I don't know if I have the confidence for that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm a strong enough swimmer to
Mm.
swim that far out and make it back. So I gauge based on my capabilities how far I can push it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think it was that. Maybe it was different. I shouldn't say it wasn't different, but I don't know any other way of being.
Mhm.
So I didn't really think it was unique. Definitely, while it was happening to me, I didn't think it was unique. I thought everybody grows up like this. One day go to the forest, one day go to the waterfall, one day go to the beach,
And they're like,
one day.
"Hmm."
Yeah. Sabru was saying that, okay, enough formal education, do something, learn something. You can write your exams, you can go to university, but learn something.
Okay.
So we visited Kalakshetra and I met Leela Akka there. She was the director there, Leela Samson. And the way she spoke about dance, she just lit up, and she was not talking about the style. She was not talking about Kalakshetra. She was just, I don't even remember what she was talking about,
Mhm.
but she was talking about dance, and everything about her was like vibrant and alive when she was talking about it. And I said, whatever she's doing, I want to do that. And I was thinking I'll do 4 years of Kalakshetra and then I'll go to college and study literature or art. I
Mm.
wasn't sure exactly
Okay.
what I wanted to do, but literature was a big thing for me. I thought I'll just do that. I'll finish this and then I'll go study in college. And I'll do my 12th exams along the way
Mm.
as part of this 4-year course. I'll also sign up for open school or A levels or something and do my exams. So that was more or less like a rough plan. I spent half a day in Kalakshetra with what were the first years at that time, but when I joined, they became second years. And they were all so vibrant and full of life, and they didn't have like a laid back attitude about things. They were not dismissive about things. They were
Mm.
very like, I have to learn, I've got to do this, I have an exam, but full of smiles, and the eyes were all so sharp and shining. I thought, yeah, why not? Like,
So you were sold on the idea?
as a temporary stopgap, yes, I was sold. Still, dance was not like, I'm going to study dance,
Mm.
I'm going to do this. I was lucky though to have Leela Samson there as a director, because not only was she the director, of course, and she was like trying to bring some changes, but she also took care of me. Like every time I had an issue with something, I would go and sit in her office. Akka! And she has a soft spot for Rishi Valley children, I think. So she would explain things to me. Why are you getting upset about this? And then she would kind of put it into context for me, and then I would be like, okay. And then I would go back. But I was very lucky to have her there at the time when I was studying. I don't know if she was not there, how easily I would have experienced college.
Just circling back, when you had that conversation with your dad saying, I don't want to go back, how did that go? Because in other households, that conversation wouldn't have gone down very smoothly.
I think he also wanted to pull me out of formal education. I mean,
Mm.
I know he also wanted to pull me out of formal education at that time.
Mhm.
It has nothing to do with. It's more that I was studying all these subjects that it was just formal education. I
But
don't know how much I was grasping from
Okay.
it. and kind of, you know what you're going to study, and then you're going to write an exam, and then you're going to move
Mm.
on. I was studying art in school. Other than art and maybe literature, biology, everything else was kind of just something I had to do because I had to do it. And I was willing to do it, but I didn't want it to be my whole day. And I think he had also kind of, he was also like, okay, enough formal education. Now learn how to do something with yourself. Like, train yourself to do something, and then you can see what you want to do about that. Even he had no expectation that I was going to be a dancer, or if I go to Kalakshetra, then I have to do this after that. He was also very much like, you do this, and then we'll see from there where you go. We'll put you, I mean, we'll take you wherever you need to go from there. So it was not like a sit down, okay, I don't want to go to school anymore. It was not really like that. It kind of was a casual conversation that came up a few times.
From your experience, how important do you think parents should help children navigate? Like you said, you didn't know what you wanted to do. How important is it for them to navigate with the child instead of saying, listen, this is what you have to do?
Oh, I think it's most important because uh, your interests and my interests are so different. Or let's say between a husband and wife, it's so different. Or between brother and sister, it's so different. So obviously between you and your child also, it's so different. I mean, each human being has such varied interests. I mean, look at the kinds of characters we have on this planet. Every kind of character. You don't know what kind of character your child is going to turn into. I think navigating that is very important as opposed to just saying do this or do that. I do think there is pressure. Like, let's say you're in an industrialist family.
Yeah.
There is, of course, pressure for legacy. There is pressure for taking on what your father or grandfather has been working on. And, but I think there's a beautiful way to go about it. I think you can easily, if they get involved in the business when they come on vacation and they sit with you and they get fascinated by the work that you do, I think they will stick around. If they're more fascinated by something else, they will do that. It changes from family to family, but I think if you expose your children to all walks of life and all kinds of things, then I think people will get into it. Like recently, we met a set designer, and it was not even a thought in my head. I didn't even know somebody could become a set designer.
Oh, really?
Because it's so far from my world. I didn't know somebody could become like a costume designer only for movies. Like that you're not doing fashion and you're not trying to take it to Paris, but literally just for this movie, dress everybody in a particular way, in a particular theme. These were such, it was not even a thought in my head. So, but for you, I'm sure it was very much an option. You were so exposed to, let's say, being a camera person or being a director or being a set designer or a costume designer. All of these things were valid for you. For somebody who's grown up with a science background, being a doctor, being a scientist, being a researcher, being in biomed, these are all valid options. So I think I just met such an array of people that many things were inspirational or a possibility for me. And dance, I kind of stumbled into it and I just loved it so much. There was but I think you have to go through that, because I wanted to be an author, I wanted to be an academic in literature, I wanted to become a painter, I wanted to do so many things. I could have been any of those things, but this is where I stayed finally. But none of those options were removed for me by my father or by my uncles or aunts or whoever was around me. They were not saying you have to get a job and earn money and this is your future. It was very much, what will you do? Let's see what the girl does. She's interested in this right now. She's interested in that. And I'm not somebody who blooms instantly. I'm not somebody who, you put me in a new situation and immediately I know what to do. I take time, I'll watch, I'll observe, I have to work under somebody for some time. And then I get like somewhere I feel like, okay, I understand this. Then I start doing my own thing. I'm not built like that I just go somewhere and immediately I'm sparkly and shiny. I'm not that person. I like to be in the back and I need to be kind of very much a backstage person. Except for the fact that I perform.
Exactly. I was just
outside of that, I really, for me, it's that. Observing how it works, how it doesn't work, how it works for some people, doesn't work for some people. And I'm saying that across all walks of life. by backstage because of being a performer, I'm
Yeah.
saying. But to be in that space and observe what it has, then slowly I will, little by little, put some things out and see where it goes.
So you
from
take time.
there. I take
So from all this, you went to Kalakshetra.
time.
How was the transition for you? Was it easy? Was it difficult?
There were some parts of Kalakshetra that I just loved,
Mm-hmm.
and some parts of Kalakshetra that were very difficult for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think this very rules based teaching method,
Mm-hmm.
this was the first time that I had ever been exposed to it. Not in the ashram, not in Rishi Valley.
Mm-hmm.
This being encouraged to ask questions all the time, not in Kalakshetra. That's also where I realized my background was very different from other people. My background was so different that I know that students and teachers had very strong opinions about me before I had even entered the classroom.
Okay.
So I had to battle that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But what they were teaching me, everything was new.
Okay.
I mean, I had learned dance from when I was 9 years old, but as an extracurricular, not with any great interest. Physically, I was quite fit and agile, so I was happy to do it, but I was not in love with it or anything. But learning not just the physical aspects of dance, but all the theory that came out around it, all the history that's happened in terms of like poets and just Tamil history. We learn all about the Alvars and Nayanmars. Then we study temple architecture. Then we look at theory and texts. Then we look at Natya Shastra. Then we have to write our own paper about it. I mean, it just opened up a whole new world that I had never been exposed to. All my reading up till then was very, very Western and European. Lots of Shakespeare, lots of Bronte sisters, lots of very, like all the classics,
Yeah.
lots of Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens, I don't know how or why, but used to be my favorite author growing up. And then it kind of shifted after that, and I read a lot more Indian authors after that. But so it was a new fascinating thing to study the culture and be a part of it and practice it on a daily basis. It just was a new world that I had entered. So whatever difficulties I faced, I dealt with it sometimes responsibly, sometimes irresponsibly. Thankfully, I had Leela Kar there to like
Vet it out.
talk me through a few things. But I think something about maybe the way I was brought up is I was able to separate the teacher from what they had to offer. I know in terms of their technique, in terms of their training, in terms of the end result, there is really no place to learn Bharatanatyam like Kalakshetra. I have to say that. In those 4 years, the kind of ringing that you go through, dance will not leave your body for the rest of your life. It's like that. At the same time, whatever attitudes the teachers may have had or whatever biases the teachers may have had, I was able to maybe separate it. Their opinions about me did not affect the way I took their training and their teaching.
Mufi, when you say this, it's such a new world because I'm used to like basics, like school, and then you're back, you have your extracurriculars. It's amazing.
It was new for me also. I think people, when they see me today, they assume that this is how I grew up. I really grew up in shorts and t-shirts, hanging upside down. I didn't. Sari was so far from my thing, but that all that happened around that time, Kalakshetra time.
It's interesting.
And it was simply no context. No context.
My mom has a couple of friends who have gone to Kalakshetra, and till date, if you ask them, they have these life lessons they still follow. What did Kalakshetra teach you about life that you still follow?
I don't know what it taught me about life, like contextually. I'm not sure, but it taught me everything I know about dance. Maybe not everything, but 80% of what I know about dance comes from there. I think that there is something to the quality of that place. The people who founded it, the people who built it, they put their whole lives into it. And I think the space still somehow resonates from that.
Okay.
If you just walk into the Kalakshetra campus, everything is just beautiful and different. Somehow it's like art is in the air, dancing is in the air. Like a lot of posture correction, a lot of understanding how to do the steps. We definitely learned in the class, But a lot of it came from watching rehearsals.
Okay.
So there's something about the dedication to the art form, something about the precision with which, no matter what is happening to you, dance comes first. I think, I don't know if it's a life's lesson, but it just became the way you were.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the intention of the place, if not in the execution, it's very much like how the ashram is, which is your intention for how you do something, the level of attention and dedication you give whatever activity you're involved in right now. In Kalakshetra, that happens to be dance.
Mm-hmm.
In the ashram, it happens to be 25 different things. That is more important. And you kind of learn that if you really pay attention, you can change everything about the way your body works. We Something as simple as when our seniors used to do the performance, we could not believe that it was possible for somebody to do a 40-minute varnam on stage without taking a break. It was simply not in the realm of possibility.
Okay.
But by the time you come to your fourth year, you do a whole kacheri, 1.5 hours or 1 hour 45 minutes, you're dancing on stage, and it is tiring, but you feel like something that you could never have done, now you can do it. And I think that kind of applies everywhere. And now, like when I talk to a few people, especially people from corporate backgrounds and all, I tell all of them, you must learn to sing and dance, not to be a performer. You must learn something that you're really bad at. Like you must be terrible at something.
So singing for me.
And you will see within a week, within 2 weeks, if you pay attention, how you improve. What you could not do a week ago, what you could not do 2 weeks ago, how you improve and you can do it now. It will teach you so much about how else. So things you're already good at, how you can quickly upgrade your skills. I think everybody must do something that they're terrible at, just to watch the progression, or just to get some joy out of it. Like nobody has to sing to be on stage. You can just hum when you're cleaning the house and cooking your food, and you can do a little bit of dance just because it makes you feel nice. Then you understand a little bit more about the arts. Like arts were never like a niche thing, no? Always it happened, let's say in a temple. It's not that everybody who came to attend the performance was educated in dance. They all came just to listen to some songs, watch some dance. Even when I was younger and we used to perform in Kerala, like the watchman would come and give us like very specific compliments. இந்த வர்ணத்துல நீங்க இப்படி பண்ணும்போது ரொம்ப அழகா இருந்துச்சு, நான் இது பார்த்ததில்ல. And he's just the watchman of the temple, okay? But I'm saying they've somehow maintained that culture there.
Yeah.
But this was very common. Everybody had some understanding of art, whatever art, whether it's painting or dancing or music or literature. It was a part of their lives. So I think that's what kind of a deep dive into that happened for me in Kalakshetra. And now a large part of the work I do is this. Please learn something that you're bad at so you can see how quickly you can upgrade your skill. But that's just that's a, what do you call it? That's a red herring, so that somehow art comes into your life. Little bit, understand little more about music, understand little more about dance. Then when you go and watch a performance, you understand a little bit more. Then you learn something, then you understand. Like, you know, you can build that knowledge, and it must become, everybody should know. Yeah, it's so beautiful. How can you prevent somebody from appreciating art? I don't know. You have to educate everybody.
I think so too. Because for me, when you say art, my knowledge is zero. The only dance performance I have seen is Shobna dancing.
Yeah.
Krishna. That's only, my knowledge is only that. So yeah, I think we need to, I think everybody needs to. That's true.
See, initially you can appreciate the and Shobhana is so beautiful. You can appreciate the costume and the beauty, but what she's doing with the form, the body,
the expression,
the
emotion,
the story. Once you kind of get all that out of the way, then you experience what the dancer is experiencing. When I am having an intimate moment with Krishna, you are also having an intimate moment with Krishna. But for that, you have to understand that this is Krishna and this is a woman, and those basic things have to get out of the way.
That's true.
Then you are, you know, fully involved with what the dancer is trying to portray. Otherwise, it's beautiful, it's nice, I felt nice, but I didn't really know what was going on stage is also okay, but you have to start somewhere.
That's true. I think I also need to start
And if it
somewhere.
moves you, you
Yeah.
must do more about
Yeah.
it. There's no need to be professional about everything. Just learn as much as you want to learn.
So abhinayas are a very important part of Bharatanatyam. Is it something that you learn through practice, or is it something that comes from life experiences?
No, it's both.
Mhm.
But it comes first and foremost from practice.
Mm.
You start by imitating your teacher,
Mhm.
because Abhinaya is as much a technique as it is an emotional pathway for the dancer and for the audience. But it is a technique. You have to learn how to use your face. You have to learn how to bring Abhinaya into the body. If I sit here and do pretty things, you're not going to feel anything. But when I stand, if in my whole body I learn how to bring that shyness, or bring that bravery, or bring that anger, or bring that sadness, or joy, or love, or whatever it is, then the audience experiences it. Otherwise, it's on my face. Romba alaga sircha. She cried very beautifully. She cried very beautifully. I'm telling you, it's the worst insult. Because when I'm crying, you should cry. You should
shouldn't
not
think
be
I'm
like,
beautiful."
wow, she cried so nicely. You know?
Mhm.
And movies have that advantage, which is that you're in a dark theater and you can zoom in and zoom out and show only what you want them to see, which we are also kind of trying to bring the same experience.
Mhm.
But we don't have the advantage of like zooming your eyeballs into just my face and just see how this is moving,
The
right?
tears coming.
Right? So my whole body has to express that emotion so that you get little bit of it and then it sparks something in you. So Abhinaya is definitely practiced.
Mhm.
It is something you have to learn. It is something you have to understand. It's something that you have to learn how to do. So love is not just love. Love in this context, love in that context, love when you're in separation, love when you're together. Or if it's joy, what kind of joy? Is it a childish joy? Is it a teenage joy? Is
Wow.
it joy because they've looked at a boy for the first time? Is it an experienced woman who is reminiscing about somebody and feeling joyful? Has she felt a lot of pain and separation and now she is thinking about that joy? Or after that separation, now they're reunited. Is it that kind of joy? So you really have to go into the context of everything, and you pull it apart and you dig deeper and pull it apart and you dig deeper, and then you decide this particular piece I want to approach this way. Then once you do that, you practice it, practice it, practice it, practice it, practice it. But practicing it is not only about moving your face or moving your body. It's also about practicing how to reignite that emotion within you every time. Because otherwise, you're not convincing, which I think is a lot of what actors do. Which is that you have to, if I'm feeling joy, if you smile, nobody's going to believe you. But every time you laugh on stage, you have to laugh, really laugh,
Yeah.
like from within you. You really have to ignite that thing, and you have to do it at a moment's thing, because the context is always changing, the poetry is changing. So you practice all of that. So it's not just your physical practice, you also have to practice igniting that emotion within you and being able to throw it out so that other people can feel some. Because if you're throwing 100%, they are feeling maybe 10%
Yeah.
of it. If you're a really good artist, maybe 50%
Yeah.
of it. You are definitely feeling more than the audience is feeling, but you catch those few moments.
So many layers, no?
Oh, it's a lifetime of learning. There's no
Yeah.
point at which you can ever feel like, okay, I've got this, I've mastered this. The minute you think that, something else will come and you'll be like, oh, there's all of this. It's a never-ending journey, and it's beautiful.
When did you realize that dance was something more for you?
After I finished Kalakshetra, I did 1 year of arts management at Dakshin Chitra.
Okay.
And they had quite a nice course, and it was not something I was exposed to. It was very different for me, so it was interesting to do it. But I was not able to dance as much as I was dancing when I was in Kalakshetra,
Okay.
obviously, because they were dancing day in and day out. And physically, my body just missed it. Like this twice a week class or 3 times a week class was simply not cutting it for me. I just
Like itching, right?
yeah, really. And I'd have a long day in college, and then I would go for dance class, and I would be tired, but I would be like,
Yeah.
It was like a thing. Or I would go really early, and really at that time, my teacher was Nirmala Nagaraj. 5 o'clock in the morning, she used to take class for me. 5:30. For 1 hour, she'll take class.
Mhm.
Then she will take care of our household, and then she'll have class after that. So I had some wonderful people in my life though, who really really went out of their way to make dance a beautiful experience
Mhm.
for me. I just missed it.
Yeah.
It was just like, and I said, forget it. I'm not managing anything. I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to dance.
Yeah.
And then I started performing, and there was really no turning back from there.
While you talk about all the positives about dance, no, I'm sure there would have been somewhere where there was a little bit of a difficult relationship with dance. We all have our good days and bad days. What brings you back to those goodness? Like everyone has that, no, when they're acting or dancing, you have this difficult, little rough waters.
I feel like many times I forgot what a privilege it was to be a dancer.
Ah.
So at those times,
Mhm.
I was like, or I got a little disillusioned with
Mhm.
the field, like the career aspect of
Okay.
dance. Never with actually dancing, practicing, learning.
Mhm.
I was never, I mean, I had difficult times for
Mhm.
various reasons, but I never felt like
Mm.
that. Like,
Okay.
oh, we'll leave it and go. But in terms of managing a career, many times, because it's not in my nature to be like I can't, even to this day, I'm not a good dancer. I do the best that I can, but it's never enough.
Mhm.
I feel like it can always be done better. So I find it very difficult to go to somebody and say, put me on your stage. And that's a skill that I was not taught in Kalakshetra, which I wish we had been
Mhm.
taught. And it's also not in my nature to say, give me that opportunity or put me in that
Mhm.
role, or I'm very like, you tell me what you want me to do, I'm happy to do. I'm very happy to do it.
Mhm.
But it's also a question of convenience, right? It's very nice to take a step back and leave that to somebody else. And I think I did that for some time in between. But during COVID,
Mhm.
when I started working with younger dancers, then I think I felt a lot of things that my teacher was telling me, which is, you need to send your eye, you need to perform, you need to tell everybody, otherwise
Yeah.
nobody will know that you're a
Mhm.
dancer. And that kind of changed the way I thought about dance. It changed the way I approached dance. I was not doing as many solo performances as I wanted to,
Mhm.
but I was working with dancers so much. It was a much bigger part of my life. Like, dance became a bigger part of my
Mhm.
life, even though I was not doing as many solo performances as I was doing before.
Mhm.
And if I ever get disillusioned with dance even a little bit, I just go back and do like an old piece that I have learned,
Mhm.
something that I know really well. And I that just you
It
just
comes
kind of,
back.
yeah,
Yeah.
you just fall in love. You just kind of fall into it because you know it, you've rehearsed it so many times in your life. So then your focus is only about connecting with it
Mhm.
and putting your life into it. And that just kind of takes
Yeah.
care of everything.
You know, that's very interesting you said that I can't go, I don't like to go ask, put me in this role. But you know, that's a skill they should teach people.
It's a skill, yeah. It's definitely a skill.
Because I also
I
don't
wish
like
I
it.
had learned.
I mean, someone has to teach it. Really, I think people have started teaching it.
Yes.
There are people who will just go ask, like,
Yes. And now I've gotten to that point. Ask, if they say no, they'll say no. What's the big deal? But it was not there when I was younger. I learned it when I was much older. I wish they would teach it. I think they teach it in business schools.
yeah,
I think they teach it in management schools. But
in your
they
art
should
management.
touch it. But they should teach it in the arts, not just as arts management. I'm saying every artist, every painter, every designer,
Mhm.
every weaver, every basket maker,
Yeah.
every musician, everybody must be taught this. How to, and it's not, I mean, PR has gotten like a little bit of a bad rep,
Mhm.
but it's just this thing of, this is the work I'm doing, and to be able to put it down in a way that somebody who doesn't know you can understand. That's all. I'm not saying you have to do a big campaign, look at my basket, look at my basket. But to be able to say, this is a basket, it is a good basket, it will
Mhm.
carry everything that you want in this basket. I can change the basket to suit your needs. This much we must all learn, which I think is not there in the arts. It should come.
Definitely.
I think it's important.
So, as a parent, I want to ask you this. My daughter is 6.
I don't have any children.
No, it's okay.
I'm a very bad parent in that sense.
That's okay. You don't need to be a parent to answer this. What do you think is the right age to start dancing?
I think 7 is a good age. It also depends on the child, but I think younger than that, the bones are still little
Fragile?
little fragile, not fully developed. And they say, I don't know how true this is because we have many examples to the opposite. Like Anita Ratnam is so tall and she started learning dance when she was 3 years old. But they say that it's possible that you don't grow to your full height if you learn dance from a very young age. But I also think at 7, they have a better understanding of how their body functions. They have more control over what they do with their bodies. There are, of course, children who do that at a much younger age. There are some children who just are like, oh, she's already dancing. Okay, send her for class. So there are definitely those. But in general, I think 7, 8, 9 is a good age to send them for class. And I think it's important that you don't put that expectation of being on stage upon them. It should be very much about learning something they don't know how to do, approaching it from different ways, getting them interested in the art form instead of just getting them fascinated by I get to wear temple jewelry and I get to put makeup, and that's really the least interesting part about dance.
But for children, that's the most.
Yes,
no, like to like just
like that's
yeah.
So looking at it as a skill, looking at it as a method to expose them to different facets of life, I think that's the way that it should be approached at a young age. And if they really show interest, then you can focus them more on, okay, but kai kaalala seriyada irukanu inga anga you can't do. Form, technique, all those things are extremely important.
I relate to sport. So when we talk to our children about sport, I think we're like, it's not only teaching you the sport, it's also teaching you discipline. It teaches you about winning, losing, teamwork. What does dance teach you apart from the art?
Same, all the same things.
Yeah.
Of course.
Anything else that I missed in the list?
Always a better dancer than you in class.
Yeah.
Always. There's nobody feels like they're the best dancer in class. There is always a better dancer than you, either in your class or out there in the world. There are many opportunities that you should get that somebody else has gotten. Many opportunities that you should not get but you have applied for and you didn't get. So you're winning and losing on many, many levels.
Yeah.
The intensity and dedication that it requires, even when you're not doing well in your career. Like you cannot train for a sport because sports day is coming up. Only if you train the whole year, on that day, maybe you will shine.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Now you don't shine this year, you'll just give it up. No. Again, the next year you have to work and hope that the next time that the opportunity presents itself, you are ready and available. So preparing yourself to be ready for whatever it is that day will throw at you. Whatever opportunity comes your way, you have to always be ready for it. I think the only thing it doesn't teach you is how to deal with your finances, which I wish it would. But other than that, I think you can learn anything that you learn. I think anything that requires physical intensity, whether it's music or dance, or even cerebral intensity, like focused intensity, I think that's really it. If you experience that and if you're able to commit to that, you can do anything with your life.
That's true, no? It's very similar to sport though.
Very much.
I want to talk to you a little about philosophy that I heard about from your father. This quote came at the right time in my life. And it's something you said he told you. So it is, don't look up at anyone. Don't look down on anyone. Just see them as they are. How has that changed the way you interact with people?
It's gotten me in trouble a lot.
How? I mean, when we say this, there are certain things you're like, it's easier said than done. Because as human beings, you always have expectations from the other person. Some you put them on the pedestal and you just want them to be there. But it's, they are who they are. And it's something I've learned this year. And when I read this quote, I was like, perfect timing.
See, as a child, it got me in a lot of trouble.
Okay.
Because teachers are not expecting a child to speak to them as an equal. And I spoke to everybody as my equal. And everybody around me, all the adults around me, spoke to me like I was their equal. Nobody... You explain things because as a child, you don't have the same knowledge or context. But you don't not in a condescending way of I know and you
Mhm.
don't know. Very much in a let's explore this together kind of way. When he when he expressed that to me, I was going through something in school, something my friend, something must have happened, I don't know. And I said, you're teaching the whole world so many things, you're not teaching me anything. He said, I don't give unsolicited advice. Now that you have come and sit down. So when he said that to me, I kind of looked at him also a little bit, because everybody around me by then was already looking at him in a very different way. Um, and the breadth of his mind, the vision that he has, the really the breadth and thought of his mind, like the scope of his mind was beyond anything I could imagine, especially at that age, even today. And when he said this to me, I don't know that I instantly applied it, like from that day onwards everything was okay, but I spoke to everybody, all adults, uncle, auntie, tata, party, teacher, student, friends, juniors, seniors. I spoke to everybody like they were my equal. It's not that they were my equal in terms of like, oh, you know so much, I also know. It was not like that. It was more like, if you know something, tell me, teach me, show me how. It was more about that. It was not about, oh, you can do so many great things and
Okay.
you have figured out how to do this spectacularly. Show me. I also want to learn. Teach me how to do it. So I think when you ask questions like that, and when somebody says something that doesn't sit in your brain, or it doesn't make logical sense to your brain, or you have not made the connections that they have made, it's easy for people in positions of authority to get offended by it. I know that I'm sure that many teachers thought I was being disrespectful, but I was genuinely just being curious. So maybe at like 11, 12, 13, 14, it was kind of difficult or whatever.
Okay.
But by the time I was 18, 19, 20, it worked beautifully for me.
Okay.
Even when I meet incredibly talented or skilled or famous people who are really at the top of their game, I have great respect and gratitude for whatever it is that they have done. But I want to know
How?
What was it that clicked for you? How did you think about it? Because I don't think that you thought about it uniquely. I want to know how you thought about it so uniquely, because the thought didn't occur in my head. So let me learn from that. So I ask questions also like that, very straight and very like
Matter of
this.
fact.
Very matter of fact. I think sometimes people feel a little bit like, oh, like, like that. But I want to know. And you're a human being, I'm a human being. What's the problem? Like, I just don't.
When you say this now, I think of this quote. I don't know if you've seen the show called Ted Lasso, where he says, people are always judgmental, but they're never curious.
Yeah.
So that's what, when you said that, I'm like, you're so curious, but for the other person, it might come out as judgment.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to learn to. So people who speak to me more than just the first 5 minutes, they get it very quickly, because I keep asking.
Okay.
If I don't understand something, I will ask you till. And now that I work with younger people, also with as part of Project Samskriti, I work with a lot of younger people. Many times they resist. Like sometimes when I do something, and then one of the boys who was working with me to curate some of the programs, they were having their own conversation, and they said, okay, we'll talk to Akka, and we'll say, no, we can't do this and whatever. And that boy said, ayo, Akka will talk and she'll convince us how to do it. Might as well do it now. But the thing is, in my head, it's so thought out and it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense to you, explain to me why it doesn't make sense. Like, explain to me where I went wrong. Okay. I'm happy to change it. But simply, I don't want to do means that's not valid. Do it.
I have to debate with you and you have to convince me.
Yes, absolutely. Because if I'm wrong, where did I go wrong? I want to understand, because I don't want to simply make the same mistake again and again. What's the point? If you know better, show me, teach me.
Okay, my view on this quote was very different from what you explained it as. But yeah, you can take it anyway.
Why? What did you
No, mine was that, like you said, you have to meet everyone eye to eye and you ask questions if you have any doubts. Mine was that you should never have expectation of people. Or you
see, that also to a certain extent. That you set up See, expectation is a nice way of saying you have some bias or prejudice, no? Like,
Yeah.
it's
It's a very fine line.
Yeah, like one skews this way, one
Yeah.
skews that way. But the idea is that before I even meet you, I have an opinion about you, whatever that opinion may be. Like, let's say now, before I came for this, I've seen a few of the podcasts and I'm thinking, okay, she's very easy to talk to and she kind of settles into it very easily and softly and gently. But I can't come and say, oh, she might think like this, or she thinks this about me, or she feels like that about me. If I come with all of that, or if I come with, oh, she's somebody's daughter, she's somebody's something else, she works in this, media is her forte. If I come with all of that, then I don't present what I have to present in the way that I can.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm putting so many expectations on you. I can be like, wow, she's the best podcaster. She interviews like this, like that. If I come with that also,
It'll be
I'm-
bus first. The thought.
no, I don't think so. But I'm saying that it also puts an unnecessary expectation on you. Or I can come and say, oh, she's only going to ask me questions like this. Then when I come in also, I come with that little defensive and little like this. But if I just come and meet you as a person and we're both, like, generally we're okay with each other, so
I
if
think
we're
so.
having a conversation with each other, why not?
True.
But if I come with any expectation, plus you come with some expectations, it's just, it doesn't serve the purpose.
True. That's true. But
It doesn't serve any purpose.
Yeah, but I really love that quote.
It's worked wonderfully for me in my life.
I need to
No
incorporate it.
question.
I'm like telling you, it's very easy to say it and say it's amazing.
Yeah.
The way you incorporate it is only where it works.
And also when I was growing up, I had a little bit, when I was like 14, 15, 16, everybody expects like this, like that. And that's another thing that he said, which has stuck with me. And he said, do you know what a privilege it is that people expect more of you?
Ooh.
Because how many people do you meet and you unconsciously dismiss them and say this is all that they can do? But if people are not dismissing you, that means there is something that they see in you, that you're more capable than what you're doing. So why don't you find out how much more capable you are? What a privilege it is that people have expectations of you. And
That's wow.
I was like, oh, you're making me responsible for my own things. Like, at that age, I was like, oh, fine. But it stuck with me. It really stuck with me. Because it's so true. So many people that
It
you
is.
meet, you can see all of their capability.
Yeah.
Not that they cannot change, but in that moment, this is all that they're capable of. In the future, they may be capable of much more. But if people are already seeing that you're capable of much more, then it's a clear sign that you can do more. So do
That's true.
more. You are putting limitations on yourself and saying, I can only do this. They are expecting more. That's their problem.
But that's true. No, we put the limitations on ourselves most of the time.
Yeah, 100%.
Your face and you will get away with it. So how will you be strict like that? Like, I wouldn't expect you to be strict.
No, Akka, like this, and then like, okay, one more time.
Yeah.
And then also if they stand in Kalakshatra, we always stand with our feet together in class. And somewhere even in Leelaka's class, I had lost it. But Akka just looked at me like this once when I put my feet back together. Now I realize I do the same thing with my students. I'll just wait. There'll be a whole group of them and I'll just wait like this, looking at their feet. Then everybody else will be wondering, why is Akka not taking class? I'll just wait. The minute they put their feet together,
there's that switch.
It's like a switch. And usually when I work with bigger groups, it's mostly for Mahashivratri rehearsal. We have very little time. Everybody has to be on point every day, on the mark, because there's not enough time for us. It's not like we're rehearsing for 6 months before we put on the show. We usually get a month and a half, 2 months at the most. Usually a month and a half is like luxury amount of time to create a whole new production, everything, and get all those dancers and coloring boys coordinated. Anybody who shows little less enthusiasm,
oh man.
but I don't shout at them.
So you're
like
a soft
that.
strict.
I'm,
It's just the look.
but I'm very strict. Start means start. Do means do. Till I say class is over, class is not over. So that way I'm very I was very shocked and very surprised to find out about myself. I
Oh, நம்மளுக்கு இந்த சைடும் இருக்கா?
yeah, really. Leelaka came this year for Mahashivratri and she choreographed the piece for Mahashivratri. I was sitting in her room and talking with her and I started laughing. I put my head on her knee. I said, Akka, I've become such a strict teacher. I don't know where it's come from. She said, even I was strict when I started. After that, it'll come. I was like, okay. So I have hope that I will soften up in the next few years. If not me, my students definitely are hoping that I will soften up in the next few years.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about your personal life. So you lost your mom when you were 7?
Almost 7.
Almost
yeah.
7? When you look back now, I mean, grief is something that never goes away. We deal with it differently as time goes. What do you think you miss the most? Is it the person or the absence of what could have been?
Actually, neither. I don't actively miss her like that. There are many significant moments in my life that I know would have been so meaningful to her. And it would have been wonderful to have her there, like when I got married or when I first danced on stage. And like recently, I think last year, she would have turned 60, which is very strange for me to, because she was so young and I think of her still as, in fact, I'm older than she was. So I still think of her as that age. But even at that time when she left, when she passed, I remember going back to school and my teacher asking me, oh, you must miss your mother so much. And I said, no, not really. And she said, you don't miss her. You don't think she'll be upset if, you know, that you don't miss her. And all I could think was, but she's gone. Like, she doesn't feel anything. Like, it was very clear that she was no more. And for as long as she was there, she was wonderful, she was lively, she was loving, she was everything. And now that she's no more, I do the best that I can with whatever it is that she has given me or whatever she has offered me. I think I maybe miss the person that she would have been today, but it's all hypothetical in my head.
Yeah.
And I have to say that my father took on every role in my life. He was my father, he was my mother, he was everything. Never did I feel a lack of care or lack of mother's love, not from him or anybody else around me. I think I was very fortunate in that situation. The other thing is also, and as you may have seen in the film, is that she spoke to me about it before she left. Not just once, more than once she spoke to me. I was there when Sadhguru was talking about Samadhi to Nirmalananda Tata, who was a Swami in BR Hills. Amma was there at that time, and that's kind of the moment where she experienced something else and she wanted to make it her whole life. I was there when that conversation was happening. I have been around so many people, even at that age, for whom this seeking is a huge part of their lives. If anything, it's a fruition of what all of us are seeking. And she left in a very beautiful way. It was, I think, if it was an accident or if it was something else unfortunate, if there was a health issue or if it was something else, I may have responded very differently to the situation. But because of the grace and because of the really incredible way in which she left her body, I don't know, it's just a privilege to have been a part of her life, really.
Yeah.
It's my privilege that I got to be her daughter and my privilege that I get to be my father's daughter.
But I think everyone needs to see that movie of hers. I mean, I think it gives so much of clarity, especially when you don't understand it. You know, I think it gives so much clarity and so much depth about what she's talking about, what she was feeling. And to hear you, your father, and the other people talk about it is beautiful. I mean, it was a concept that I never understood. So when I watched it, I was like, oh, wow.
And Mahasamadhi was very much a part of this culture. There are many, many people who have attained Mahasamadhi. It is just that happening in a modern age where people witnessed it. There were people there and people heard about it. And of course, because now because of technology,
Yeah.
news and everything, everybody kind of knows about it, hears about it. And up until recently, people could visit the Samadhi also. Only now
Okay.
we've made it part of the house, because the only two people who could never go to the Samadhi were Sadhguru and me.
Oh.
So now we've made it part of the house for some time. I think many people are very upset that they cannot visit the Samadhi.
Okay.
But because it happened in a more modern age where information is accessible, I think more people heard about it.
Mhm.
But otherwise, in this culture, people attaining Mahasamadhi is there for centuries. You can find people Samadhis in so many places. So many people say this person attained here under this tree, அந்த கோயில்ல யாரோ attain பண்ணாங்க. Like this, there, you
Mhm.
know, I think it's just the fact that it's happened in our lifetimes that we think it's that unique. When we hear about it in the past, we think, okay, they also attained,
Okay.
and you kind of leave it at that. It's my privilege to have been to have been a part of her life.
That's nice.
She was wonderful. There's no.
But how do you still hold that connection with her when you didn't get to experience her fully? Do you find ways that?
I feel like I know her
Mm-hmm.
as a mother.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, I don't know her as a friend or a spouse or as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of relationship I would have had with her. I definitely don't have that experience. But from a child's perspective, I knew so much about her. She was with me all the time, and or as much as she could be. When I was in school, obviously she was not there. But I sometimes when I see certain saris and things like that, I always think, oh, Amma would have liked that sari. Even so many years later, at that time I didn't even know saris. But I have this thing of Amma would have liked her sari, this sari or that sari. And so many people in the ashram knew her so well.
Mm-hmm.
So they also kind of, when they talk about her, it's very much like they talk about her like they met her yesterday. And she's such a huge part of the initial part of Isha Foundation. She's such a huge presence in building Isha Foundation in those first few years. That her presence is there all over the place.
Even in the movie, they were all talking in present.
Yeah.
Which I absolutely loved.
Somehow she's like that. She was like that, and even with Sadhguru, it's like that. Whether he's physically here or not here, he's such a presence in my life and so many people's lives that it feels like here, like almost like he's in your house. Even though he's not living in your house, you feel like he's there. No, it's a privilege, definitely.
Do you feel her presence still with you?
Not like that. Not like that.
Not like that. Not like that. In a good way.
I think her influence is definitely there to a certain extent. If you go and sit in the Samadhi, there is a sweetness to that place.
Okay.
There's a certain something about you changes when you're in that place. If you sit there quietly for some time, you're just so like overwhelmed with love. And not love for anyone or for anything, but there's a sweetness that you experience, which I think was very much a quality of who she was. But not that I'm thinking of her all the time, or
I mean, I'm sure you have your moments, like when.
Yeah, but even that, it's more about her. In the sense, it's more about, oh, Amma would have really liked this, or it would have been nice if she was there. But never like, I wish she was there for me.
Okay.
I don't feel any hole that is unfilled or any lack of any lack of mothering from anyone.
I think that's because your dad filled that completely for you.
My father definitely.
And the people
all
around
the people in the ashram, everywhere we travel. Even today, I have so many people who are halfway between being my friends and being my mother. Like the way they care for me, I have a very friendly relationship with them. Yeah. But they also take care of things that they would take care of for their own daughters. Okay. No, my life is filled with mothers and fathers. That's
lovely. So moving on, I want to talk about your husband. I'm very fascinated by him. Recently, because of his reels with Rakesh, I'm like, wow. And I love how he speaks with an American accent, but the minute he sings, it completely changes. And the fact that he likes CSK, I was sold.
I mean, he's a Chennai boy. He was born in the US. He was
Okay.
born and brought up in the US. Till he was 21, he was in the US.
Mhm.
And he had moved to India for about a year in between. When he
Mhm.
was about 11 years old, he'd moved to India. Didn't go to school, nothing. Part class, Tamil class, part class, Tamil
Yeah.
class, playing outside.
Uh,
This was one full year, okay? I think that had a very big impact on him.
mhm.
Then he finished studying law and society in college, and then he said, I'll move to India and try to do Carnatic music for some
Okay.
time. That trying was what, 20 plus years ago.
How? Okay, tell me your love story. How did you guys meet?
We had lots of common friends. It's a
Mhm.
very small world.
Mhm.
Dancers, musicians, everybody knows everybody.
Okay.
It's a very small world. We had a lot of common friends. It was very much like, you know all my friends, but I've never met you.
Mhm.
And he was like, why do you know my friends and I've never met you? So
Okay.
it kind of became like that. And so we started chatting. I think we were talking about something or someone with a group of people. And then
Mhm.
we also started chatting outside of that. We were friends maybe 6-8 months. And then it was like, okay, shall we give this a go?
Mhm.
He said, shall we give this a go? And the next day morning, he left to London.
Like, did he go?
Before he came back from London, I left to South Korea.
Wow.
Then I came back for just a week in between, and we hung out a little bit
Mhm.
few times that week. And then I went to the US for like a month and a half.
Okay.
So even in the first 6 months of us
Giving it a go.
giving it a go, we hardly saw each other, which
Okay.
has really been the basis of our relationship. But I think what mattered to me was he's extremely intelligent.
Mhm.
I'm very scared when this thing airs. He's going to hear all these things about himself.
We'll only block it for him.
Block it for Sandeep Anand's profile. He's extremely intelligent.
Mhm.
He's very committed to his music,
Mhm.
and the kind of intensity with which he approaches his music at that time when
Mhm.
I was 22, I just thought, if he puts his mind to anything, he will accomplish it.
Mhm.
That much I knew about him. So I knew he was smart. I
Mhm.
knew he was committed. Everything else was extra. He's extremely funny. Both of us we used to just make comments and comments and comments, and nobody else in the room understood what we were talking about, but we would be laughing and saying things to each other.
Mhm.
And I think about a year into that, my father called and said, "Who is this boy?" I was like, "What boy?"
I like with everything.
Like,
But these
eh,
fathers, you have to give it to them. How did he find out?
I don't know. But he called and said, "Who is this boy? What is this musician?" I was like, "What boy? Who boy?" He said, "Bring him home. I'd like to meet him." Ayo. This is an American boy who's very like, it had not even been a year, or it had
Mhm.
just about been a year since we were like, okay, like this is a little bit more serious. And I was like, okay, listen, you have to come and meet my father. He said, "I'm not ready to meet your father. We've not talked about this. I said, I'm not asking you.
I'm telling you.
I'm telling you, next week you're coming to Coimbatore and you're going to meet my father." And he was like, "What is this nonsense?" I said, no, I'll book your tickets. Next week you please come. So I think my father met him at that time. And one thing about Sadhguru though is that whoever he meets, even
Mhm.
though he met Sandeep as somebody that I was seeing, when he speaks to Sandeep, he speaks to Sandeep as Sandeep.
Okay.
So they were talking about music, what his plans are, what is his career, what does he want to do, and everything. And then he just told us it's not about getting married or not married, but being in an uncommitted relationship is not good for you and it's not good for her.
Okay.
So you all just have to make up your minds. Are you all committed to each other?
Mhm.
Is this it for you? Otherwise, you really have to think about it and see what you want to do with
Mhm.
your life. And he had asked me also, is this it for you? I said, I don't know if this is it, but if this is it, it's wonderful.
Mhm.
I wasn't like, yes, I'm going to marry him. He's the man that I've always wanted to be with. But I was very clear that if this is the person I'm with,
Mhm.
it would be wonderful. I'm
Okay.
fully in. And I think then after that, Sandeep and I started talking about it more seriously. And I remember once we had gone out for dinner, and he said, "If I ever get married to anyone, I'm going to marry you." And I said, "If, sir, I'm getting married, you want to marry me or I'll marry somebody else. But I want you to know I'm getting married. There's no if in my life." When I was about multiple times, but once particularly when I was about 19, 20, my father asked me, "Do you want to get married or are you considering brahmacharya?"
Okay.
So I sat down and I really thought about it, and because it was a real option. I'd grown up around them. I knew that it was an incredible way of living your life.
Mhm.
It's a powerful way of living your life. It's a very freeing way of living your life.
Mhm.
And I'd grown up around them. I know the kind of intense and wonderful people that they are. But I didn't think I had the emotional ability to just be on my own for the rest of my life.
Okay.
I didn't think that I was capable of it. That's the truth of it. If I was capable, I wish I had the intensity that those people have. Really. The kind of vibrancy of life and focus that they have with anything that they do. You just
Yeah.
want to be around them all the
Mhm.
time. But it's a very individual journey, right?
Mhm.
As a brahmachari, it's just you and your guru. Everybody else is, you work with everybody, you love everybody, you care for everybody, but your most intense relationship is just about working on yourself and making yourself a certain way so that you're open to another possibility.
Okay.
And I don't know if I had the emotional ability to do that on my own.
Okay.
So I always kind of knew I would need a partner, I would get married. So then I told him, I was like, "You marry me or I'm marrying somebody else, but
If
I'm getting married, please." I think he took that quite seriously, and I think within a month of that, we were like, "Okay, let's really make a go of this." No, at that time he was like, "Okay, so like let's get married. Like if
Mhm.
this is it, then let's get married." And so from when I met him, maybe 2.5 years, or from when we kind
Mhm.
of decided, okay, this is something we would like to do,
Mhm.
within 2 years we were married.
I wanted to ask you, both of you are in creative fields, and in creative fields, you have a lot of bad days as well. How do you all both deal with it together? It can be normal bad days, creative bad days. How do you all show up for each other?
Because he's an artist and I'm an artist, there is a huge level of understanding that it's very much about how you are on that day
Mm-hmm.
is how your performance goes.
Mm.
So if I'm not well prepared enough, we will talk about it. And he is far more experienced, or he's much more my senior.
Okay.
As an artist,
Mm-hmm.
he's much more my senior. Like he's
Okay.
been performing for much longer than I have. He's built his career up to a place where he's significantly superior to me in terms
Okay.
of where we are as artists.
Okay.
I'm still building my way up
Mhm.
there. So he has that kind of experience of when things are not going well for him, how does he deal with it, and this and that. So a lot of it I have learned from him in that sense. I think the most difficult thing is the fact that we don't really get to spend as much time with each other as we would like. But being artists, being performing artists for whom performances happen all over the place, there is also no pressure to be back home, which is a big thing. And I think particularly for women, married women,
Yeah.
this thing of being home and taking care of certain things, whether the family has put the pressure on you or you have put the pressure on yourself, and a lot of women put the pressure on themselves, it simply doesn't exist in my life because Sandeep is also an artist. There is no expectation that I don't have to choose between taking on a performance and having family or home commitments. It's simply not a choice. If I have a performance, I will go for the performance. If he has a performance, he will go for the performance. There is no question of, but I had said that I will stay for this, or I'm going to be here for your birthday. If I have a show, I'm there for the show. There is simply no question. So that I think is the biggest way in which we support each other. We're very understanding of the ridiculous schedules that we both have. All our friends tease us. They're like, "Do you remember this man when you came home? Was there a stranger in your house?" Or like one of my friends said, "Hey, just give your house for rent and stay in the hotel now for the few days that you're there at home. Just give it for rent and you can stay in a hotel nearby." Um, but there is a different kind of understanding. Also, being creative has a lot to do with being vulnerable,
Mhm.
putting your ideas out there that may work, may not work. Particularly, I think when you're choreographing and you're making new pieces, you really don't know if it's good or not. In the
Mm.
sense that you love it, you have put your life into it, you have thought of all these perspectives and tried to distill it down and show it in the way that you
Mhm.
think is aesthetic and you think it works and you think it is precise. But somebody else can watch it and see none of it,
Okay.
and maybe it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
And I think this happens in film also,
Yeah.
where you put your life into it but the film doesn't do well.
Yeah.
And you just have to live with it. So sometimes pieces work, sometimes pieces don't work, some performances work, some
Mhm.
performances don't work. What is nice is that we can come home and there is somebody who will very honestly, brutally honestly tell you, these are all the things that need to be
Mhm.
fixed, this was not approached right, this is not how it came out in rehearsal. So there is somebody there who has both the experience of being a performer and somebody who's brutally self-critical
Mhm.
and is willing to share that criticism with you.
Yeah.
The same way that I am critical of my own performance, and Sandeep says that his mother and I are his worst critics because he'll feel like a kacheri went really well and he'll come home and I'll be like, it was good, but you know. And I'm always asking him, what about this? What about that? All the things in which I felt didn't work as well as I thought it would work, or it didn't feel like that. He'll say, no, no, actually, it came out well.
Mhm.
This part is what didn't work.
Okay.
So, and I don't have a great education in music.
Okay.
So, it's not that I'm looking at the technicalities of it. I'm very much looking at it from a performance standpoint.
Mhm.
He is also not like technically knowledgeable about dance.
Mhm.
So he's also looking at it from a performance standpoint.
Okay.
Because the technicalities we know.
Mm.
If you make a mistake in the technique, you know, and you have to fix it, and that takes practice. But does it work as a performance? For anybody else who's sitting in the audience, are they moved by what you're presenting? That is the criticism that I get from him, and that is also what I offer back to him. And I think that helps a lot.
I understand that because both my parents are actors, So when they sit and they discuss, I mean, for me, when I watch it, I'm like, oh, the film is fantastic.
Yeah.
But they break it down. And I think you need to, how do I say this, very honestly trust the person who's telling you that they
Yes.
don't mean it in a bad way.
Yes.
Because at that point, sometimes your ego will be like, what is this? I thought it was great. How can you break it down like this for me? Yeah, I think you need to have that sense, that relationship needs to be very strong for you to get that understanding.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I at no point do I feel Sandeep is giving me criticism because he wants to make me feel bad.
Mm,
That's just simply not there.
yeah,
It just doesn't exist. So no matter what he says,
yeah.
I'm willing to listen and I'm willing to fix it. And it's not limited to him. There
Mhm.
are other people in my life who do that
Mhm.
also. But it's rare to have somebody who so openly will tell you.
Yeah, because people will think twice. They're like, why should we upset them? You don't know how they'll take it.
Yeah, and many people will come backstage. Oh, it was very nice. It was very nice. Then they'll go back home and have the real rundown of
Yeah.
what the show was like. I want that rundown.
But
I don't want romba alga irundhuchu and then go. Like, that's fine.
Beautifully
I
you
know
cried.
my makeup is nice. That's really not my focus. What worked? What didn't work? How do I pull it apart and put it back together in a way that it'll work? Because I'm going to do the show again and again. In a movie also, you've done it once.
You
they've
can't do anything
filmed
after
it,
that.
and there's nothing you can do. But I can rework it every time I
Mm.
perform that piece for the rest of my life. I can rework it. So I need as much feedback as I can get to be able to fix it in such a way. Of course, you also get feedback from people you don't want feedback from. You
That's
can take
part
that
and
with a
part.
pinch of salt. It's okay.
Part and parcel. So when I see you, you seem like a person deeply rooted in tradition, yet modern. So how do you balance it? Or is it something that comes naturally? Or is it like something very consciously you try to balance out?
I don't. People see me now in sari and
Yeah.
bindi, and they think this is how I grew up always. I don't don't see myself as anything. Like I love wearing saris,
Yeah.
so I wear saris.
Mhm.
I like the way a kumkum bindi looks,
Mhm.
so I wear a kumkum bindi. I'm also very comfortable in shorts and a t-shirt.
Yeah.
I would also like to wear dresses. So I just wear whatever. It's just that I think the only thing that I put out there publicly is my work in dance.
Mm.
And so everything else we're quite private about, Sandeep and I, both of us.
He is now doing reels.
That's
Okay.
true. Now he's doing reels. That's true. But everything else about our lives we're quite private about. So this is the part that everybody sees. But I'm so comfortable in them. And people have a misunderstanding, I think, of what traditional means.
Mhm.
You assume that if somebody's in a sari, they also think like your grandmother and they also sit like your grandmother and talk like your grandmother. But I think all of us have had modern upbringings.
Yeah.
And also in this weather, wearing a suit seems like a silly thing to do. Saris are so comfortable, they're
Yeah.
so beautiful. What art, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
those weavers are just,
Yeah.
really, what a gift to have them in this country.
So, what's your relationship with the sari like? Like, when did it evolve into something that you really, really love? Like, when you talk about it, I know you really love the sari.
The thing is that I grew up around people who are always very well dressed. And I don't mean fancy dressed, but even like the brahmacharis in their orange clothes, their saffron robes. Just the fact that it was pressed and kept neatly. And then Sadhguru also always wore only white. Initially, for the first, I would say, 15 years of my life, I only saw him in whites. Other than like the shorts and t-shirts and trekking clothes and whatever. But his formal clothes were only whites.
Okay.
But very clean, crisp. So something about the way people dressed kind of stood out. And then there were many of these women who were beautifully dressed in saris and salwar kameezes and dupattas and all of that. When I joined Kalakshetra at 16, you had to either be in a dance sari or you had to be in a full sari or a pavade, like davani. I think I missed out. Somehow I had this dislike for the davani.
Okay.
I wish I had worn it at that age because obviously you can't wear it now.
Who said now everyone's wearing it? We're back to it.
Now it's a ghagra now, so everyone is doing it, or lehenga now, so everyone's doing it. But just like that, pattu pavade kind of pavade davani was, I didn't like the way it looked, or maybe I was just opinionated about it at that age. I had some idea about it and I didn't like it so much. So the days that you're not dancing, you have to come in full sari.
Okay.
So it was at that time that about 10, 12 of my mother's saris were given to me.
Okay.
And then all these other people started picking up saris for me and everything. And I was very lucky in that they were not just buying saris. They would explain to me where the sari came from, what kind of weave it was, what kind of colors were normal, why mine was either part of the regular tradition or mine was unique because they're using colors that are unusual or whatever it was. So I just became more and more fascinated with the fabric. In Kalakshetra, they had a problem with how I wore my sari because I would just throw the pallu on and go. I just wear it like literally with the same focus as wearing a t-shirt. That's the same amount of focus and effort I put in wearing my sari. Always. But they were very particular, pleats, ipdi neat irukonu, inga safety pin, anga safety pin, all of that was there. And I never did any of that. And Leelaka and many others were wearing beautiful saris. So many women at all these events that I had to go to with my father would come draped in these beautiful saris. I would touch every sari, feel, and I would look underneath the sari to see what kind of weave it was and those kind of things. And somewhere along the way, I just fell in love with it. And I found it so comfortable. I couldn't understand why people were uncomfortable in a sari. And also it's so easy.
Yeah, it is.
Because no matter where you go, what you do, you have a sari, you can wear it and go.
Yeah.
You don't have to
that's
match a kurta to something. Is the dupatta, is this too fancy, too much embroidery, too much like this, too much like that. You're like, is it a wedding? Okay, slightly heavier sari. It's not a wedding, any other sari will do. And I also pick Also because I don't wear the exact matching blouse. I have the advantages. I can wear that one blouse and wear 10 sarees with
That's true.
it. And then if I change the blouse, people think I'm wearing a different saree. So it just became a way to fall in love with the different types of weaves. We have more than 130
Yeah.
weaves in this country. Many more we used to have
Mhm.
that were very actively and significantly broken down. They, when the British were here, they actively destroyed a lot of our weaving traditions. So, whatever little bit we have left, I think we must celebrate it. And a sari, especially a well woven sari,
Yeah.
is as precious, I think, as a Van Gogh painting or whatever,
I
because it's
completely
the
agree with you.
same level of attention and skill and design and color and life that the
Yeah.
weaver has put into it. Plus, they fit you no matter what size you are.
Exactly. That's when I started wearing the sari, you know. After my daughter, I had put on so much of weight. That was the only thing that fit me. And I felt so nice in it
It's
that I
so
started
pretty.
wearing it more. But I truly believe it's something my mom's taught me that sari is something that you pass on for generations.
Yes.
And I feel every sari holds an emotion. Do you have a sari that holds a lot of emotion?
Oh, I
too?
have so many. I have one beautiful Mysore silk in pink, which is from my mother.
Mhm.
I have a green Mysore silk, which was gifted to my aunt when she was pregnant with my cousin.
Mhm.
And Mysore silks are now
So
absurdly
They're
expensive.
so expensive.
So I have with big mango borders a green
Wow.
one, which when she got it, when she was pregnant with her first child, was expensive for her. But now when I think about it, I'm like, why didn't you buy 3 of them? Because, and as they age, they wear better. I have robbed my mother-in-law of all her wedding sarees. And she's like, "Enna பழசா எடுத்துன்னு போறேன் நான் புதுசா வாங்கி தரேன்." I'm like, "No, I want the old ones." So I have like 4 or 5 sarees that she got when she was getting married. And I have this friend in Delhi who has exquisite taste in sarees. So every time she's like cleaning out her cupboard, she will send like 5, 6 sarees that she has had for years.
Oh, wow.
And these soft, worn sarees, they hold so much memory.
Yeah, they do.
I have the very first sari that I bought myself for Deepavali. And I now, when I'm like looking through my cupboard, I take 15, 20 saris and I take it to the Samskriti girls. Now they're all grown up and
Yeah.
dressing very nicely. They travel with me for performances and all of that. So I just,
Yeah.
the same enthusiasm with which I received all those saris from all these aunties and everybody around me, I'm like very excited to be that aunt now in
Yeah.
everybody's life. You get a sari, you get a sari.
I'm very particular. When my mom wants to clean her cupboard, no, I'm like, you cannot give anything without asking me.
Yeah.
Because I love her saris. And I hold 2 saris very close to my heart. One is her wedding sari, which I wore for my wedding,
Oh,
for my reception.
okay.
And one, my grandmother. I lost my grandmother 7 months ago.
Okay.
So when, after she passed, my uncle said, you can take whatever sari you want. And the previous night, before we had to go, I had a dream about her in the sari. It was a yellow, it looked like a Banaras, but it's not. It's a very soft sari. And the first thing when I went to her house, that sari was right there. And I took it and I'm like, that's it. Thank you very much.
Something about them, you
Yeah.
feel like
And it
it's there.
smells like her.
Mm.
And I have pictures of her. She's come for my kid's birthday in it. And I was like, that's it. That's my memory of her. So it holds a lot of memory.
Very much. And you can pass it on for generations if you take good care of it. And also a sari is something that if you wear it out, like our dance saris and all, we wear and sweat and
Yeah.
wear and sweat. So all of those, once they wear out and they start getting holes and everything, first of all, when they get that soft is the best time to wear them.
It's like the
But
soft 90s. Have
They-
you
yeah,
seen?
but they get holes and all, then you're a little, okay,
Yeah.
I can't wear this for rehearsal anymore. But then you tear them up and you use them. Like I cover all my jewelry in my old dance saris.
Okay.
And during COVID, I got a sewing machine at home because I couldn't loosen, tighten, There's no tailor to give it to. So I made little bags
Oh,
with all my
wow.
old dance saris, and I put all my jewelry in that now.
Huh.
So it just protects, like all
Yeah.
my dance jewelry,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
protects it and keeps it. If that doesn't work, then you still can use it to wipe things in your house because they're very soft, you know, and it doesn't leave scratches or anything. And worst come to worst, you can use it to clean the floor.
Yeah.
So the cloth, you really use it.
Yeah.
You really, really use it. And which is something you can't do with polyester clothes or viscose clothes or anything like that. You can't reuse it the way you can with cotton and silk and old saris.
I love it. You know, when I first saw you was this video I saw of you on YouTube. You were doing a tutorial of how you put your pottu.
Oh my God.
Okay. I was so fascinated by it because the only person I have seen do the pottu like that is my mother. Pannamale, she used to do it, and I used to watch her and I'd be like, what a beautiful woman. And I saw you and I was like, wow. How did you start? Like, how did this process of this pottu
So
start?
this is very common. Like a lot of dancers wear kumkum pottu. It's not rare. Like in
Okay.
Kalakshetra, we have to wear pottu, right, to
Yeah.
go to class. So I used to wear a long one because that's easy to draw
Yeah.
with like kajal or eyeliner or whatever it is. It was easy to draw. And in fact, I used to wear only long bindis. And then my friends were like, hey, try one round bindi, round bindi. So she would put Vaseline and put kumkum for me for a few days when I was in college. Then I really liked the way it looked, so I started doing it every day. But many dancers do it. So
Okay.
then a few people in the ash, not a few people, many people had messaged me and asked me, how do you wear your bindi? How do you wear the bindi? How does it come like a circle? How does it come
Yeah.
like a circle? I don't know, yeah, my finger is like that only I put it. So then I told my friend, I said, hey, I can't be explaining to everybody
I'll
how
do a
to
video.
put. We'll just make a video and post it. I was not expecting it to do that.
Do you know how many millions of
Well,
views that video has?
I am too scared to check. And I also think that like on my page, it maybe doesn't have as many views, but somebody else posted it on YouTube.
It is on YouTube.
And other people have shared it or like reposted it on their own Instagrams. And even those have done really, really well. Also, if you're going to wear a bindi, why do you put a piece of plastic on your face?
Yeah, I'm wearing
I'm saying if you're anyway going to wear a pottu, might as well wear a kumkum pottu because why you're giving the plastic business only, you're giving the plastic industry more business. You might as well get some manjal in your house, put a little thing and make it. Plus, Devi Temple has kumkum all the time, so I have access to really good kumkum. It smells so good.
Yeah, it smells so good. The real
It's
nice
very
ones,
nice.
no?
Yeah.
I know.
I don't know how it happened. It just became
I was so
viral.
fascinated. I was like, wow.
After that, everybody's like, make a video of how you wear your sari. And I'm like,
Next, idha.
no, but I don't really think about it. I just think it's so easy. But yeah, I mean, maybe.
I want to talk to you a little bit about your work. So the school that you all run, for someone who doesn't know about it, can you tell me about it?
So, Sadguru Gurukulam Samskriti is a Gurukulam system that we have. The children come to us between the age of 7 and 9 and they stay with us till they're 18.
Okay.
It's unique because the method of teaching is completely arts based.
Okay.
So, they learn 6 main subjects. They learn Kalaripayattu, which is a martial art from Kerala. They learn Bharatnatyam. They learn either Carnatic or Hindustani music and they can do vocal, they can do an instrument, it's their choice. Then they learn Sanskritam as a language, they learn Tamil as a language, they learn math and English is taught also as a separate subject. So these are their main subjects and yoga is a daily part of their life.
Okay.
So dance, kalari, music, yoga, Sanskritam and math are the main subjects.
Okay.
English and Tamil are also taught as language subjects which they learn. And everybody speaks Tamil, everybody speaks English. So that's a huge part of it. And as they grow up a little bit older, then we introduce them to Ayurveda and Siddha.
Okay.
Yoga is a everyday part of their life.
Okay.
So it's, I would say, the most important part of their lives because them doing their practice, doing their sadhana instills a certain level of growth and clarity in a child from a young age that whatever they are exposed to, they're able to absorb quite quickly. After they get to about 11, 12, they get to drop 2 subjects. Once they get to 15, they get to drop a few more subjects and they specialize in any 1 or 2 subjects. So if they want to specialize in yoga, we have a Hatha Yoga school as part of Isha Foundation. So we send them to Hatha Yoga school for 6 months. They're fully over there. It's really amazing to see these 16-year-olds and see all these adults, everyone from like 20 to like 45 years of age. These children are on par with any of them. In fact, many of them do far better than them, just because their clarity, their thought, the focus with which they're able to do things is incredible. Many of them become dancers, musicians, or martial artists. Many of them choose to do something completely different. Like this boy who said, anyway, Akka will convince us and make us do it. He is very interested in camera work, light work.
Okay.
So he does all the lighting design for us now.
Okay.
He interned with a Bollywood director recently. He's in touch with a lot of cameramen in this country who even I didn't know he was in touch with. He is in touch with a good friend of mine in Delhi who's a lighting designer who also I didn't know he was in touch with. So like this, they're very creative and they reach out. Anything that they put their hands on, they're able to accomplish it. The intention of Samskriti is not to churn out dancers and musicians, which will naturally happen. The idea is that they must be fully developed physically, fully developed mentally and emotionally. They must be full-fledged human beings. Beyond that, whatever they put their mind to, it will just open up like that in front of them. If they have the focus and dedication, they can easily do anything after that. So the same way that education goes through math, science, physics, geography, history, we do that through the arts. So when we're studying about a particular place, let's say they're going to go to Karnataka for their excursion, then they learn the history of Karnataka, the geography of Karnataka, what are the significant temples there, what is the language spoken, what are the kind of dance, music, this, that. They learn everything about that region. Then they go and visit that place. Now, we're not able to do this every single time, but this is how they learn history and geography. So over 12 years, we cover slowly. Now you've learned a little bit about this state. Now this is the history of India from the British perspective. This is the history of India from before that. So slowly they're exposed to everything, but using the main subjects as arts. This is the intention. And they live there with the brahmacharis. The teachers live on campus. So they have access to them. There's rehearsals happening all the time. It's a wonderful environment for them to kind of be in. You should see them. My God, they're like bright and fiery, those kids.
What are the gaps you think the school is filling that other schools are not addressing, like the mainstream schools?
I think people think that because it's a Gurukulam and it's arts, that it's a little bit more easy. But in fact, the schedule that they have is grueling. Very, very focused and a little bit more discipline in the school than I would say in a regular school. Like, you can't just sit around and walk like this. If you sit, you have to sit straight. If you walk, you have to walk properly. It's about learning how to use your body and your mind. It's also, I feel, in regular schooling, it's more about the information that you collect. Whereas here, it's not about the information that you collect. It's more about, do you understand what you're doing? How did you get from here to here? So when you learn a physical discipline, it becomes very clear. How do you go from A to B? Because you feel it in every cell in your body, you feel it in every muscle in your body, you feel it. Same with music. How do you get from A to B? When you start singing, Sarli Varse is the most difficult thing for you to do. By the time you finish all the kirtanams that you learn and the raga alapane that you're exposed to, you start to think about it more actively. The thing with arts is that you can't be passive about it when you're learning. Whereas you can be passive about other subjects. Like I can memorize something and put it down in a history exam. You can memorize a choreography for dance, or you can memorize the swaram for dance. But if you don't put your life into it, it will not shine. It will not show the way it's supposed to show. And that is also part of your training. How to invest yourself in the choreography is a part of your training. How to invest yourself in the music. Because we're not judging you based on how much you remember. Whatever little bit you remember, how well do you do it? How involved are you in it? How focused are you in making all the corrections that are needed to put yourself in a place where you are skilled at what you have chosen? So I think it fills a lot of those skills that maybe a regular school doesn't have. These are also skills that you end up learning in college because you're fully there on your own and you have to learn people skills, this, that, everything you learn there. But here in the school, if there's an event, our children run the whole event.
Okay.
So everything from calling all the people
Okay.
to organizing backstage. Is the stage ready? Which department takes care of stage? Which is the lighting department? Swami said he won't give us permission. How do you convince Swami to get permission to give him lights? Then you have to put up a budget for it. Getting the budget approved. They go through the regular ashram department system.
Okay.
They have to deal with all the departments.
Okay.
And it is real world experience, because it's not that, oh, Samskriti has asked and so we're like recreating approvals
Okay.
and then we do it. No, they have to get approvals from the department head.
Okay.
So they learn all of these skills so that no matter what situation they're in, they're
Okay.
able to think and able to figure out, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, this is how I want to do it, this is how I don't want to do it. And they can learn those. Then when they go out, if they want to become businessmen or they want to become, see, they may not turn into scientists or
Mhm.
doctors or lawyers, but pretty much everything else is open to them.
That's what I was going to ask you. After they finish the school, can they do like mainstream college?
There is one boy who studied business in University of Texas.
Oh, wow.
So it's very much a question of what you do with the skills that are provided for you.
Huh.
Of course, a majority of them are going to be artists,
Mhm.
but many of them will do art not just as dancers and musicians. They will
Okay.
start off like that and get into allied subjects,
Okay.
because that's where their skill is. And the way they deal with people is very beautiful.
Yeah.
Even as children, they take on very adult responsibilities.
Mhm.
Events, even like when Sadhguru's event happens, like one of the Samskriti girls who's very quiet and very shy and actually sometimes unwilling to push herself.
Mhm.
Even I have sometimes been like, come on, you can do more. She was doing the backstage handling for one of Sadhguru's events.
Okay.
So she was calling all the cues.
Okay.
And after that event, everybody, oh my God, she's so wonderful. She handled it so well. Everything went so smoothly. So she has the opportunity to be in all those situations and find a skill that she's good at.
Okay.
So maybe she won't become a dancer, maybe she won't become a musician, but people skills and running an event,
Mhm.
she could do smoothly. So smoothly that everybody thought she was a full grown adult. Only when they met her after that, everybody was like, oh, you are doing it? This little 17, 18-year-old
So
girl,
cute.
you are running the whole show. And Sadhguru's events are thousands of people.
Yeah.
So cues have to be given like very precisely. She did the whole thing wonderfully.
Wow.
So who they are within themselves is so gentle and so wonderfully established. From there, they can do anything if they put their minds to it.
Huh.
But that's like any school.
That's true.
If you don't use the skills that have been given to you,
Nothing
you
that-
do what you
yeah.
can do with it. But if you put it to use, I think it's like a trampoline. You get like a little bit more bounce than somebody who's gone through a regular, maybe more conventional education.
That's very interesting, bro. Really nice. Because I've done only mainstream school and we only talk about mainstream school mostly here.
Yeah.
So it's always like, which board are you doing? Which board is he doing? And you're always on that. So it's very refreshing to hear about this.
It is a commitment though. It is a lifestyle change. And we need the parents to be as committed to the lifestyle.
That's true.
It cannot be that you come home and then you do whatever you want and
Mhm.
say whatever you want and behave however you want, and then you come back and the school will take care of it. So we also include the parents. The parents have to come and spend one day in the school before they take their children back home and go through the schedule the way the children would go through it. So
Okay.
waking up at 4:30, 4:45 in the morning, sitting for Guru Puja, doing all of their sadhana, then being on the campus through the day, having lunch with them, then being in the campus in the afternoon, having dinner with them,
Mhm.
and then taking them home.
Okay.
So the children also put on a little performance for their parents and all of that happens. But the parents have to understand that the children are doing more than they are doing on a daily basis. So when they come home, you also have to respect the fact that this is not just some child, edo panatu parvala, not like that. Like they're becoming such focused human beings that at home also you have to give them that atmosphere. They can laze around and watch TV. Nobody has a problem. They're home for holiday. Nobody's asking them to be intense and do like this, like that. But certain things you have to take care of. You have to make sure that at least they do their sadhana, or at least they're thinking about it. They may not do it every day. And when they come back, we never ask. We don't ask, did you do your sadhana every day? We just simply don't ask.
Okay.
Because what you do at home is between you and your parents. But we encourage the parents to keep a similar lifestyle.
Makes sense.
But it's up to the parent what they want to do.
Otherwise, when they come back, they have to start back. From
Yeah, and they should not feel that, oh, this happens only in school. Nobody else lives
So it's a
like this.
lifestyle.
Yeah.
So my last two questions to you. Okay. These are powered by Naturals.
Okay.
So this is something I ask all my guests. What is the best piece of advice you've ever given or received?
Don't look up to anyone. Don't look down on everyone. See them exactly for who they are, because otherwise you will miss the possibility. If I look up to you or look down on you, this incredible possibility that you are, I will miss out on an opportunity to really experience that. It's me who loses out at the end. So that is something that I think has really stayed with me my whole life. I try as much as possible not to give advice because Sadhguru is such a huge presence in my life, and he has spoken about pretty much everything that there is to do. Like any question you have, if you look it up on YouTube, he has spoken about it. So I try as much as possible not to give life advice. Something specific, how to deal with a specific situation, I may give you my perspective on it.
Okay.
But I don't have a hard and fast, this is how I approach my life. It simply doesn't exist for me.
But he gives the best advice.
Thankfully, he's around in my life. I can.
But he doesn't give unsolicited advice. I love that.
Yeah.
So my last question, I'm going to read it to you.
Yes.
When everything external is removed, roles, identity, expectation, what remains constant for you?
I think even when the roles and expectations are there, I'm still just Radhe.
Yeah.
People ask me, oh, you're Radhe, you're a Bharatanatyam dancer, you're Sadhguru's daughter, you're somebody's wife, you're like this, you're working in the school. I don't see myself, like when people ask me to introduce myself, I just say I'm Radhe. I don't qualify it with anything else because genuinely in my experience, I am not any of those things or I am all of those things depending on the situation. When I am my father's daughter, I'm fully my father's daughter. And when I'm at home and I'm there in that relationship, I'm fully there. When I'm in Samskriti and I have to take on the role of a teacher, I am fully a teacher. As my husband's wife, I'll irritate the hell out of him. I mean, but my identity is not dependent on any of those things.
Okay.
I'm just me. I'm just trying to figure out how to do this, how to do that. And my life has been full of joy. I think that stays with me. No matter what, everything else may happen, may not happen. Things go up, things go down. But my life has been wonderful. I don't have any.
I mean, you couldn't have said it better. I want one question. What does your name mean? Like, how did you get the name?
Radhe? Radhe is one who is always joyful and brings joy to others. It's the same as Radha. It's just that in the Sambodhi in Sanskrit, anybody whose name ends with A, you would have called them A. Okay. Like even in Malayalam, they still do this. It's just the Sambodhi. Like if somebody's name is Chitra, they call them Chitre.
Okay.
In Sanskrit also, if you call somebody Radha, you would have called her Radhe. Oh. So they just made my name Radhe because the only time you'll use my name is when you're calling me.
Yeah.
So my name is Radhe.
You know, my daughter's name is Radhya.
Really?
She's named after my mom.
How beautiful.
But thank you so much for your time.
No,
and it really means the world that you did this for me.
No, I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so glad I got to meet you because we've never met before.
Yeah, we haven't.
And I watched also a lot of the interviews, and I think it's so nice to hear women just talking about their lives because it's such a everybody sees them from one perspective or the other. Either you're somebody's mother, like this, somebody's mother, somebody's wife, whatever your profession is. Everybody sees maybe one facet, definitely, maybe two facets of you. But hearing all these other really incredible women talk, how they approach their lives, and just there's something so nice about talking to women. Yeah, there's just like they live their lives very differently, I think. And there are all kinds of pressures. but almost every woman I know handles it so beautifully, so gracefully. Yeah, so I really loved watching many of those
Thank you
interviews.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.